2005. Okay. What happened in 2018?
I was still alive.
Never do Google search on the real thing, never.
I think that was the year that I got the Protective Services Medal or something for all my years with search and rescue.
Great. Good to know, because that's coming up here. So I understand that this medal signifies that it's recognizing of project work within the community. Is that your volunteer work? Yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure.
My medals, would you like me?
Okay. So throughout the years, we know that your dedication of personal time and contribution of process and benefited the search and rescue. That's correct. And developing trails and walking clubs as the Trans-Canada Trail and the Saskatchewan Trails Association, and hanging out with the Wascana Wanderers and the Volks March, ensuring that the annual cadet 600 Wing Snowbird and Cadet Dinner happens.
On the 8th of November this year.
Thank you. And then taking care of McNabb Community Association and the Christian Women's Club. Phew. Then you have the ability to bring the Canadian Club Board back to agenda topics when we stray, and continue volunteering your time. So you're a true supporter of Canadian Club, and we want to thank you for that. So in the spirit of gratitude, and on behalf of the Canadian Club of Regina, I'm honored to present an honorary life membership to you, Dorothy. So, thank you. But everyone knows who you are, so it's all good.
Honest farm girl.
Honest farm girl. All right, now, because we're going to do the real business of what has to happen, I'm going to, Carol Draper is at the piano, and Robin Swales is going to come, and please rise for the singing of O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Cape land, glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you, Robin. Now the show begins. I call upon Will Chabun to introduce our special guest, the Honourable Ralph Goodale.
The various versions of O Canada, including the most, I guess it's the most updated one, including en français. I'm flabbergasted as to how. Welcome, everybody. The Canadian Club is a weird and wonderful institution that, as Darlene has pointed out, has been around in Regina alone since 1908. Basically, the Canadian Club has no agendas, no ambitions, other than to bring really interesting speakers to the good people of Regina. Generally, almost always, with the theme of getting to know Canada better. We don't sit in church basements and make protest banners. We just want to hear interesting and entertaining speakers. That's our shtick, and we're sticking to it. And today's guest, and this is the 3rd August that we've had him back here, we'll give this poor man a break someday, is the Honourable Ralph Goodale, who is High Commissioner of Canada to the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And let's get into it. I see that you have a new gig as the Canadian representative to the International Maritime Organization. What on earth is that all about?
That's actually been part of the job from the beginning. But let me say, first of all, thank you to the Canadian Club. I really enjoy the hospitality that you provide every year, now for the 3rd year, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to meet and visit with so many old friends and new friends back in Regina. So I'm very glad to be here. When you become the High Commissioner for Canada in the United Kingdom, you automatically also become Canada's permanent representative to the International Maritime Organization. That is the one UN body that is located in London. And it's a specialty organization that focuses on the safety and security of maritime shipping around the world. So it's very technical, but it also is affected by geopolitical circumstances around the world, including, for example, a year ago when the shipments of Ukrainian wheat were being stymied from getting out of the Black Sea. And that, of course, raises issues of safety and security in maritime shipping. And the IMO was heavily involved in that situation, trying to find ways to alleviate the risks that were brought on by Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine.
Now, that brings me to a year.
Whoops. What am I doing?
When I put my microphone on about 20 minutes ago, because it goes through my jacket, if I forget and take off my jacket, I'm going to crash everything. So,
Is it okay now? Yes. All right. Here we go.
quite a year. We've got the terrible war in Ukraine is continuing.
Yep.
There is very fierce fighting in the Middle East, centered in Gaza, but extending up through through Yemen. What are your thoughts on this year of remarkable and frightening upheaval?
Well, the world is a very difficult and dangerous place. I was thinking, in terms of the conversation that you and I were going to have, what's different, what's new, what's changed this August compared to almost exactly a year ago when we were all together in this same room. And that is one of the most profound changes, that in addition to there being one major global conflict, which was Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, as of last October, there is now a second major conflict, major war, the Hamas attack, the terrorist attack on Israel that happened October the 7th of last year, and then Israel's response to that over the last number of months. And you might ask, well, what's that, either the war in Ukraine or the war in the Middle East, what's that got to do with the Canadian High Commission in London? Well, there's always an international spillover effect. For example, with respect to Ukraine, there's been a movement of people out of Ukraine to get to secure territory. All of that takes a lot of immigration paperwork, and all of the necessary documentation is done from the immigration platform in London. We have at the Canadian High Commission in London 350 people that work as part of our team. 1/3 of them deal with immigration matters. There's not a huge flow of immigration from the United Kingdom to Canada, But there is a very significant flow from various parts of Europe and the Middle East, and all of that is also handled in London. So the evacuation from Afghanistan, about 40,000 people were relocated to Canada. Most of that paperwork was handled in London. In the case of Ukraine, 1.2 million people applied for temporary residence in Canada from Ukraine. And of those, all of those applications are handled and processed individually, one by one. They're all given very careful, conscientious attention. There were close to 1 million of the 1.2 million, close to 1 million were approved to come to Canada. What's interesting is only about 200,000 have actually made the trip. And what I think that tells you is that people are interested in having an escape valve, a fallback position if they need it, but what they really want to do is stay in Ukraine and defend their country, which they are doing valiantly every day. The point is, Ukraine is really now the front line for democracy for the whole world. And that's why the United Kingdom, as a matter of foreign policy, Canada as a matter of foreign policy, the United States and others make the commitment that we will support Ukraine in every way we can for as long as it takes. Because you just cannot allow a tyrant like Putin to win. And therefore the free world stands with Ukraine. In the case of the war in the Middle East, there were consular issues to take care of. People are on the move, and the next phase of this may be in relation to Lebanon and what happens there. Although everybody hopes that there won't be that escalation of the conflict. But London loaned consular officials and others that were useful in terms of international diplomacy to assist in dealing with the situation in the Middle East. So obviously that's one set of circumstances, one in Ukraine that's ongoing, one in the Middle East that has now begun and is ongoing, where London may not be engaged right on the immediate firing line, so to speak, but we are involved day by day in providing the support and the assistance and the help to try to deal with it.
One of the big news stories out of the UK this year has been the election of a new government for the first time since, 2010, when David Cameron took over?
14 years, yes, that's right.
Labour government in office. Last year you described Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, as sort of the Roy Roman of Britain. Cautious, middle of the road, not given to extremes. Do you retain that impression of him in the early days of his administration?
Yes, he's been in office only since the 4th of July, but he's performing in these early days of the new government, I think, extremely well. The election happened in the UK earlier than had been expected. I think the general conventional wisdom was that there would be an election probably in the fall of this year, but it came earlier, started the last week of May, lasted through June, and election day was the 4th of July, which caused the Americans to move the date of their 4th of July celebration to a week earlier, so that they weren't going to be celebrating on the British election day.
Bad optics, yeah.
But in any event, watching the British election was a fascinating experience. The way conduct themselves in an election is in many ways similar to ours because it's essentially the same kind of political system, but different in a number of ways. The polls were open on election day from 7 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And then in each riding, they close the polls and they collect all of the ballot boxes from the individual polls and bring them to a central location in order to be counted. Now, for any of you who have been in a Canadian election, each ballot box is counted in each poll and reported individually to the central returning office, and then you can track the vote as it's coming in. We're ahead in this poll, we're down in that poll, we're coming back in this one. You can see the vote accumulating over election night. Not the way they do it in the UK. All of the ballot boxes from all of the polls are brought to a central returning office in that constituency. And then all of the votes are counted all at once. And you don't know the result, nothing is announced, until all of the votes in that particular riding are tabulated. So when the polls close at 10 o'clock, some ridings count quickly. I think they had the first result from one constituency in about 45 minutes. But some of them were counting all night. And it was 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning. And then when they announced the result, all of the candidates from the opposing political parties stand on the stage in the returning office. I don't recommend this approach. But they stand on the stage in the returning office, and the returning officer announces the result with all of the candidates standing there not knowing what has just happened. Whenever, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. It's all through the night. What they also do, though, is through the day they conduct exit polls in each riding and right across the entire country. And what is released at 10 o'clock, and all the networks go live at 10 o'clock with the results of the exit poll. And the exit poll is obviously, in this case, very credible, very reliable. They announced at 10 o'clock that there would be a large Labour majority government elected. They were forecasting 410 seats for Labour out of 650. As it turns out, they got 411. So it was a pretty good poll. Yeah. What they couldn't forecast from the polling, though, were the nuances in the vote. In fact, Mr. Starmer got only 1.5% more in popular vote than did Jeremy Corbyn 5 years ago. Corbyn got about 33, and Starmer got 34.5. But on the basis of 34.5, 1/3 of the vote, he got a massive majority of 411 seats out of 650. If I can just get the numbers, Labour went from 411, in the 411, they gained 209 seats. The Conservatives ended up with 121 seats. They lost 251. The Lib Dems gained 61 seats to finish with 72. And a new party arrived on the scene, what's called Reform UK. They got 15% of the vote and elected 5 members of Parliament. The significant thing in the vote is not with just 1/3 of the vote. The Labour Party won a large majority because the Conservative vote fragmented. They went from 44% down to 24%. Some of their votes stayed home. Some of the vote went Labour. Some of the vote went Lib Dem. And some of the vote went to that new party, Reform UK. Because of that fragmentation, Labour won a huge number of seats on the split of the vote, where they were able to come up the middle between all of the other alternatives. That fragmentation was not evident in the early polling, but there was obviously a huge change in the political result for the UK. For the first time in 14 years, they have a Labour government. What I found very interesting in the early days is how quickly the transition happens. The polls closed at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, July the 4th. By 10 o'clock Friday morning, Prime Minister Sunak had been in to see the King to resign. And by noon, Mr. Starmer had been over to Buckingham Palace to see the King to accept the invitation to form a government. So within from 10 o'clock at night to noon the next day, the government transition took place. In Canada, that would take several weeks. In the United States, by constitution, it takes 2 months. In the UK, they did it overnight. The moving vans were turning up at Downing Street in the middle of the night to move out the Sunaks and to move in the Starmers. The whole cabinet, at least all of the major positions in the cabinet, were named by 6 o'clock Friday night. They moved very, very quickly. And two other things. I think the new government has started well in terms of its relationship with Canada, because on that first day, on the Friday, while he's appointing his cabinet, Mr. Starmer made contact with 4 world leaders. Joe Biden in the United States, President von der Leyen of the European Union, Vladimir Zelensky, and Prime Minister Trudeau. Those were the first 4 calls that he made. The other
This is a dumb question, but why does Canada have such prominence given our population and our economic clout? Why would we be given preference over, say, Germany or India or any number of other countries?
Well, I think it is the very excellent rapport that Canada has with the UK, and sometimes we take that for granted, and we maybe should make more of it than we do. But the relationship is a very strong relationship. It was with Mr. Sunak, and it will be with Mr. Starmer. The rapport is solid. We don't agree on everything. We've got a hiccup now on the trade negotiations, which we'll get sorted out eventually. So there are points of disagreement and dispute, but fundamentally, Canada and the UK are in the same headspace because of very similar values and instincts. You can see that in our social policy, for example. Canadians place a great deal of store in our public health care system. So does the UK. In fact, the Canadian system was in many ways modeled after the NHS in the UK. On foreign policy, in dealing with an issue like Ukraine, for example, there didn't need to be a lot of advance consultation between Canada and the UK about what we're going to do, because our instinctive reaction was the same. This notion of standing solidly with Ukraine for as long as it takes. So I think one of the risks of a relationship like we have with the UK is we do take it for granted. And I think the fact that Mr. Starmer made a point of calling Prime Minister Trudeau on that first day is an indication of the respect that the two countries have for each other, and for the kind of relationship that we want to continue to have for the future. The other thing I would say about the transition, in addition to how fast it happened, is how civil and polite it was. Obviously, Starmer and Sunak have some fundamental political differences. But in the process of the transition, they absolutely respected the Constitution, and they were very determined to have a successful transition of power in a democracy, a democratic constitutional monarchy that could be an example to the world. And they did it very well. Both Mr. Sunak in letting go and Mr. Starmer in taking charge. And they were very polite and respectful to one another.
When the smart people in the High Commission get together for coffee, who are they predicting to win the Conservative Party leadership?
You know, I don't think anybody knows yet. There are, at last count, I think 5, unless I've missed somebody. There may be 6 now. Candidates, all are fairly prominent former cabinet ministers. Some represent the middle of the party. Some represent the more right-wing side of the party, and I think they're wrestling a little bit with what is the best direction for the future. Do they want a more populist kind of approach, or a more ideological kind of approach, or pragmatic, right down the middle? And they will have candidates representing all of those points of view. There will be the National Party conferences this fall, one for the Labour and one for the Conservative Party and for the Lib Dems. The Conservatives will be holding leadership forums as a part of that conference to allow all of their delegates from across the country to interview all the new candidates. Not new candidates, but candidates for the office that is newly available. They will know them all as former cabinet ministers. But at this stage, I don't see any handicapping or betting yet on. Now that, mentioning betting, that is a really interesting pastime in the UK. They bet on everything, including the election. And that became a bit of an issue because when Mr. Sunak called the election, it was earlier than most people had expected. And partway through the campaign, there was quite a controversy when it was revealed that a couple of the police officers in the security detail around the Prime Minister had placed bets on whether or not there would be an early election or not. A couple of Conservative candidates placed bets on that same point. A Labour candidate bet £8,000 against himself that he would lose. Starmer fired him, by the way. So this was kind of the running controversy during the campaign about who was betting on what.
I've heard it said that Labour's support was a mile wide and an inch deep. That is, a relatively small shift in votes could put Labour into considerable trouble the next time they go to the polls.
I think from a political science point of view, that's probably right. People say in politics that governments don't get elected, they get defeated. And in this case, I said Labour's percentage of the popular vote did not move very much from where it was last time when they were in opposition. 1.5 percentage points is the total difference. The Conservatives moved from 44 to 24. Labour only went up in the middle from 33 to 34.5 or whatever it was. So it wouldn't take much to make a pretty profound shift. And I think sort of practical political advice from Canada. May not be wanted in the British political system, but no one should presume too much about their mandate. You have to earn it every day. So even though there is a great big majority in Parliament, 411 out of 650 seats, when you go back to the riding, it's an entirely different conversation you have to have every day, because your mandate is operating on the basis of 1/3 of the popular vote of the country. So
The other big story from this summer in Britain was the truly shocking scenes of political violence that followed social media misposts about what had actually happened in is it Southport?
Southport, just out by Liverpool.
How did Starmer respond to it? Did he do it well? Was he over aggressive or under aggressive? What are your thoughts?
That kind of situation is always going to be controversial, and you will have all sorts of critics in the public arena and in the political arena and in the media. But I think Starmer rose to the occasion as a former director of public prosecutions. That has been his career in public life before politics. He was the chief prosecutor of the United Kingdom. I think his experience there and his instincts served him very well. He didn't leave it to his Home Secretary, who is a very accomplished person, but not nearly as well known as he is. Starmer himself led the communications on this issue, so he was out there every day. He flooded the zone with police officers and security officers, so the people who could deal with the public demonstrations were very much in evidence. They were well resourced. They had some brand new technology to use in terms of surveillance of the crowds and so forth. But two things happened that I think reinforced Starmer's position in getting control of that situation and bringing the violence under control. One was the speed at which the judicial system responded. The ringleaders were arrested and charged on the very first day. Several of them pleaded guilty. They went through the court system. They were arraigned. They appeared in court. They were convicted and sentenced within 1 week. It started on a Thursday night, and by the following Friday, and some of the sentences handed out by the British judiciary were very significant. The other thing that I think turned in Starmer's favor was the public reaction to these were clearly far right anti-migration riots, and British people turned out in big numbers to protest the protesters. It seems like a very British thing to do. But it had a powerful effect, where ordinary folks were coming out to say, whatever these rioters are doing to express themselves on the extreme right wing of the political spectrum, that's not us, that's not Great Britain. And the protesters who were protesting the protesters outnumbered the original protesters. So that, I think, really gave a strong message of spontaneous support from the British people.
Had that happened in Canada, they would be charged, released on bail, and 18 months later, they would appear in court after a prelim. How does Britain process them so quickly?
I am going to pursue this with great care with the Home Office. I am very anxious to find out what were the elements in the system that allowed them to move that quickly, because it was almost breathtaking how quickly they were able to respond. Because as you say, the Canadian system, I think, would be hard pressed to respond that quickly, or the American system. But the Brits did it very quickly. Obviously, it sped things up when they pleaded guilty.
Yeah.
But still, that's a process that would take a much longer period of time in North America.
When last we talked, the British government had just ended its trade negotiations toward a new trade treaty with Canada.
Yes.
That is the old British government of Mr. Sunak. Has the new Labour government given any hints that it might be amenable to reopening talks with its good friend Canada?
No, nothing that's definitive yet. Their Secretary of State for Business and Trade, the Right Honourable Jonathan Reynolds, has had a preliminary meeting with our minister, Mary Ng, the Minister of International Trade, and they have asked their officials to scope out what might be a successful landing zone for a new free trade agreement. And the officials are working on that now, and we'll see whether they come back and say it's worth doing or it's not. But the one thing that I would emphasize is that whether or not there are new negotiations on trade that get underway, remember that we already have a very good bilateral free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. This was negotiated immediately in the wake of Brexit between 2020 and 2021. It came into effect in the spring of 2021. It's an agreement that gives both countries market access to each other that is 99% tariff-free and quota-free already. That's pretty good. We're just working on that last 1%. And it's worth working on it and seeing what we can do to get it over the finish line. But if for some reason the two governments decide no, let's leave well enough alone, well enough alone is pretty good. The trading relationship between Canada and the UK is right now at $45 billion per year. It's roughly in balance both ways, and is growing every year. So it's a good bit of business. In British terms, it works out to $1 billion worth of trade every fortnight. That's fortnight is a word that I've learned to use in the course of the last 3 years. What we also need to remember is that this is really the smallest part of the economic relationship between Canada and the UK. We always think in terms of trade in goods and services, and that is important. But the bigger part of the equation is investment. The total economic relationship between Canada and the UK is $410 billion. $45 billion is trade. The rest is investment. Canadian investment in the UK, UK investment in Canada. It's hugely valuable, and it is growing steadily. One of the biggest players in it are Canadian pension funds. there are some big private sector firms like Brookfield as well, but Canadian pension funds are major investors in the UK. We own part of their utilities, part of their energy system, their ports, their airports, their railway system, and so forth. Public housing, student housing, childcare facilities, science and tech platforms, and so forth. And the British have investments in Canada that are almost as large as our investments in them. But we need to keep the investment environment between the two countries in really good shape, because that is the bigger portion of the relationship. But we'll work on the trade segment. It would be great to get an expanded free trade agreement, deal with that little last 1%.
How often do you see the word Saskatchewan come across your desk in relation to trade matters?
Every time I see beef and pork. And there's another great company up around Manchester, Warburton's Bakery. They have been, it kind of understates, it's not just one little bakery shop. This is a massive grain importing agency, company. They've been buying Canadian wheat since 1921. And it's now so meticulous, they've got it zeroed down. They want this quality of wheat from this particular farm. It's all between Manitoba and Saskatchewan, where that, and Warburton's is one of the best, highest paying customers for Canadian wheat. But you see it in many other ways as well, beyond agriculture. VIDO in Saskatoon, the Vaccine and Infectious Disease Organization. They are very much involved in the science and technology of developing the new vaccines, originally obviously in the great concern internationally about COVID, but beyond that now. And there are huge partnership opportunities for VIDO working with counterparts at Cambridge and at Oxford. And the Canadian High Commission works to facilitate that relationship for VIDO. PIC here in Regina, the Protein Industries Supercluster. They have been part of several trade exchanges while I've been High Commissioner, getting Canadian protein products into the British market and getting British investment into the protein sector here in Western Canada. The PTRC, the Petroleum Technology Research Centre at the University of Regina, one of the world's preeminent research centres on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Getting opportunities for that technology to be used in the UK as they try to decarbonize their industrial sector, and there are opportunities for the PTRC. The SRC, you might have seen the announcement just this last week of $16 million from the Government of Canada to support the SRC. Rare earth minerals, indeed. The only center at the moment in North America that is developing the processing systems for rare earth elements is the SRC in Saskatoon. And we've had the SRC in London several times over the course of the last 2 years, finding opportunities for the British to invest in this science and technology in Canada, and for us to develop that secure supply chain for rare earth elements. By the British definition of rare earth elements, there are 18 of these minerals that they are anxious to develop secure supply chains for. 14 of the 18 can be supplied by Canada. So obviously we are trying very hard to make sure that Canada is front and center in British thinking about where they're going to resource their rare earths. Having a processing center in North America, in Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan is a very good thing. So those are some examples of the things we work on. We're also into cultural diplomacy. I was delighted to be able to host a home concert at the official residence in London with guest star Jeffrey Straker from Saskatchewan. And Jeffrey's coming back in a couple of months. He'll be back in London for another performance. And the University of Regina Choir they made a trip to London about a year ago to perform with British and American choirs, performing the music of black composers. And Pam and I were there to watch their performance and invited them that evening. Well, come by Canada House, and tomorrow, this actually was exactly the case. We said, tomorrow we just happen to have the four tenors performing at Canada House. So drop by and you can see the four tenors. So I think there were 22 members of the choir, and 21 were able to come, and they were in Canada House and in the audience. We told the four tenors that there was a Canadian choir in the audience, just so they would know. Partway through the performance, the tenor stopped the performance and said, "We understand there's a choir in the audience. Why don't you come up and perform with us?" Which was, a great moment. The Regina Choir got on the stage with the four tenors, and they ended the performance singing "Hallelujah" by Leonard Cohen. It was a really fantastic Regina moment. So whenever I get an opportunity to wave the Saskatchewan flag, I do it.
You mentioned Canada House, which has the most incredible location, I would think, in all of London, just west of, on the west side of Trafalgar Square, hop, skip, and a jump from 10 Downing Street, the equivalent of 2 or 3 blocks from much of Whitehall and its mandarins. I understand that the building itself is marking its 100th anniversary.
It is. It is. For the first few years, the Canadian embassy, they didn't even know what to call it back in those days. The British didn't really think, we shouldn't have an embassy from a colony. Really. So there were a few years where they were arguing about what to call it. And they finally settled on a high commission. But Mackenzie King thought it, back in the 1920s, thought it was quite untoward to have the Canadian High Commission on the second floor above a barber shop somewhere on Victoria Street. So he sent the High Commissioner of the day, Peter Larkin was his name, to go find an appropriate place. And Larkin really liked that area around Trafalgar Square. There were a lot of other Canadian buildings there. The railways had an office there, for example, and some of the financial institutions. They were all raising money to build the railways back in those days. Larkin tried to buy several buildings around Trafalgar Square and couldn't cut a deal. Finally settled on the Union Club. The Union Club, right at the corner of Cockspur and Trafalgar Square. One of the most famous members was Charles Dickens for the Union Club. In any event, Larkin bought the property, and he bought the property next door, which was the old College of Physicians and Surgeons. That became the Canadian High Commission, which was opened officially by King George and Queen Mary on the 29th of June, 1925.
Okay.
So on the 29th of June, 2025, we will
100 years.
celebrate the centennial of Canada House, which is, I think, the most visible and prominent embassy
Yeah,
of them
yeah.
all in London. And we will have a number of events through the year from now until next June to mark the occasion. But it's a pretty historic time for Canada in London, and it's certainly something to celebrate.
I have promised Darlene that I would, at this point, let our speaker catch his breath. And Darlene, can you pass around the microphone, and we have time for a handful of questions.
One here.
Raise your hand, and Darlene, the man of wife of my life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, Honourable Goodale. Question, do you feel that the world is waiting for the other shoe to drop?
Oh, the world is a difficult and in many ways very dangerous place right now. My own feeling has been that democracy and free markets are in more of a minority position and under greater threat today than they've been in our lifetime since World War II. So this is a time in global affairs where we need a lot of earnest, serious international leadership, and we need a lot of collaboration and team playing among groups and organizations like NATO, for example, the G7, the Five Eyes. We need to build bridges between the wealthier North and the less advantaged global South. It seems to me the Commonwealth is rather uniquely placed to play a constructive role in building those bridges. The Commonwealth is 56 countries, East and West, North and South, rich and not so rich, big and small. More than half of the Commonwealth would be comprised of countries that would be in the global South. I think the Commonwealth can do some extraordinarily important work in helping to build the understanding and the bridges to get international dialogue going that perhaps otherwise might not have a venue where it could get started. And I think we're all anxious to know, following this fall, what role in international affairs the United States will play. And that's why the decision the Americans will make in their election in November is so exceedingly important, not just to them, but to the rest of the world too. Oh, I'm being. You have to tell us. I'm being heckled by Pam in the front row. She is. I will answer a question that wasn't asked, but one of the really high moments of this last year was the visit to the UK and to Normandy by the Royal Regina Rifles. Pam is prompting me to tell the story. Eddie Staniowski was a retired member of the Rifles. Was really critical in all of this. There's always been a plaque on Juno Beach that acknowledges the role that was played by the Regina Rifles on D-Day 1944, June the 6th, 1944. The Rifles have wanted to have a full monument somewhere in the neighborhood. So they took advantage of this being the 80th anniversary of D-Day to commission a monument to be built. It came from a foundry in Camrose in Alberta. And it's the depiction of a member of the Royal Regina Rifles running up the beach on June the 6th, 1944. It's a magnificent statue. Some of you may have seen it when it was previewed here in Regina. But the connection to the UK is that the honorary colonel for the Royal Regina Rifles is Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, Princess Anne. And they wanted Princess Anne to unveil the statue when it was presented in Normandy. And the Canadian High Commission was helpful in securing the commitment from the palace that Her Royal Highness would be there. And so she was on the 5th of June in the little village of Bretteville-la-Jalouse. It's about 6 kilometers inland from Juno Beach. And that was the farthest incursion inland by any of the Allied troops on D-Day. The Regina Rifles made it to Bretteville. And they have had a square, they call it Canada Square, in the middle of Bretteville-la-Jalouse. And now they have the Royal Regina Memorial right in the middle of that square. And what was so impressive the day that it was unveiled on June the 5th was how the locals in that area, really throughout Normandy, remember and pay tribute to the Canadians who were there on D-Day. It really is quite moving when you go into the bars. There are Canadian flags all over the walls. It really was impressive. Among the speakers, when the memorial was unveiled, was a French cabinet minister who was a local from that area, and she spoke at length, but you could tell she was very emotional about paying this tribute to the Regina Rifles. And she noted that there were more Canadians who lost their lives in liberating Bretteville-la-Jalouse than there were people living in Bretteville-la-Jalouse. And she wanted to say a very profound thank you to Canada for that liberation. But that was really quite a moment. And Regina was right in the heart of it.
Cliff Walker will be appearing before the Canadian Club at the end of November to talk about that pilgrimage.
He was there.
Oh, yeah. You have a question?
Yes, question I have. You've talked about the Ukraine, Russian, and you talk about the Middle East. Have you been involved, and in what way, the Sudan conflict, where there are so many people losing their lives as well? And what comments do you have about that?
There is no direct link, Florence, between the situation in Sudan and the work of the Canadian High Commission in London, but obviously it is a very important concern for our Department of Global Affairs, and in particular our Minister of International Development. I guess the point is, when the world is so preoccupied with dangerous situations, and there are huge immediate wars and crises like the Middle East and Ukraine, it is easy for sometimes the other real crisis points to get overlooked and lost in the public commentary. And I think it's a very good point that you make, that there are people whose lives are being lost in the Sudan and other places as well, which is all a part of this unstable and dangerous and difficult world in which we live. And there will always be more demands for us to maintain our focus on those other issues too.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Ralph, sorry, I don't have a question. I just have an anecdote.
Good.
I'm always interested in degrees of separation. And I went to boarding school in England, and in my boarding house and in my year, there was a guy called Brooks Newmark, who was a friend of mine. Now, Brooks, he was a senior minister in David Cameron's cabinet. And with the turnover of leaders, there was a fairly good chance he could have wound up with the top job. Unfortunately, he got caught up in a sexting scandal, and not just any sexting scandal, it was a setup by the tabloid press. So I'm afraid I think just before you arrived in UK, he was had to take the honourable way out. But the job he had, he was the equivalent of our Minister for the Status of Women. So, I'm not sure what one makes of all this, but I could have been a friend of the Prime Minister. I was surprised to hear he was in the cabinet, but I wasn't surprised to hear he was caught up in a sexting scandal.
Oh dear.
I think we have time for one more.
Oh, Gerald.
Well, I could ask you a million questions, but I have a daughter, and her concern is the hard and dangerous world that we are facing. But more importantly, the people in her age group focus a lot on climate change. What do you have to say about the resources of Canada and what we're doing to address, and what would you say to a young person who's facing the world that our world which has a fever?
Yeah. You know, you layer on all of these crises in the world with the wars that are taking place, the disruptions in supply chains, the march of science and technology, the existential threat of climate change, and you can imagine that young people in particular feel a little bit intimidated about the world that they have to cope with. And I guess the one bit of advice would be, don't lose your passion or your idealism, and keep to the high road and keep the world focused on what's important and what's going to be important to you. It is hard in these circumstances to keep the focus that needs to be there on an issue like climate change, and we need the energy and the excitement of young people to maintain the momentum, and there are great opportunities for collaboration between Canada and the UK on an issue like this. I visited a few months ago the northeast corner of the UK, Teesside and north of there, up toward the southern border with Scotland, where they have, that was the industrial heartland of the UK. That's where their major steel industry was located and so forth. And they're going through this very difficult economic and energy transition, but they're applying all of the tools and the opportunities of new technology they say their choice is this: we either find the way to successfully decarbonize, or we'll end up deindustrializing. They don't want to deindustrialize, so their focus is on making a success of decarbonization. Hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Those are nuclear is another sources of nuclear power. Those are elements where they can make progress and have a successful industrial sector without the challenges that are presented by CO2 emissions. What's interesting is that the package of issues that they are facing and are dealing with in a very progressive manner, in a way that crosses political lines. One of their prominent mayors is a successful three-term conservative. Another one of their newly elected mayors is a very keen, enthusiastic young Labour mayor, and they're working together to find the way to maintain their industrial economic success while also going through the energy transition. And some of the issues that they face parallel exactly what we have to do and what the issues that we're faced with here in Canada. So I think there are plenty of opportunities for collaboration between Canadian researchers, Canadian industry, Canadian government and non-governmental organizations, pooling our brain power, because climate change is truly a global issue. We can use their talent, they can use our talent, and we can pool that brain power and succeed better together. Nobody should think that's going to be easy, but we need the idealism and the dynamism and the enthusiasm of young people to get us to where we need to be in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Thank you. We're now about a little bit over the time we had allocated. I will ask Darlene to close out things.
We're going to have one more.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ralph, and your responses. You talk about the dangers in the world and how we're really warmongers. We look at creating more bombs and more military strength. What about the other side? How can we be peacemakers, and what can we do on the side of peace to stop all these hostilities and to find humanitarian answers to these difficult situations?
Well, we need people who keep those issues prominent in the minds of policymakers, not only in our own country, but indeed around the world. That is a tough challenge when people feel threatened and under attack. But peacemaking is an absolutely indispensable feature, and I think have we forgotten our talent for that? Maybe we have, and it's not easy. But when you're making your budget decisions within a country, when you're making your policy decisions within a country, always maintain a sufficient focus on international development, international cooperation, international bridge building. I go back to that point about the Commonwealth. That could be one of the major purposes, major successes of the of the Commonwealth if it finds a way to get countries talking to each other who otherwise might not be in the same room with each other, but always focused on the human element of it. And Canada tries to do that in making sure that our budgets, for example, and our programs related to humanitarian assistance are always equitably funded with our other programs and services. In our funding for Ukraine, for example, I think our biggest single component is economic support, and the next component is humanitarian support. It's not easy to keep it on the agenda, but we have to. And I think Canada is one of the countries in the world that will make that argument.
Thank you.
More questions? Thank you, Ralph. You probably need some water. We have solidified our dates for the next year. For the 24-25 season, we're on to the third Thursday of every month, and Will is, make sure you have your email address with Will, because he is due diligence in getting this information out. But for the fall selection right now, third Thursday on the 26th of September, Dan Cugnett from Weyburn, who's a musician and a investor in Saskatchewan on behalf of the Cugnett family. That's the best way I can put it, because they, I'm sure you're familiar with that name, and it'll be interesting to see how himself and his 4 brothers, who are all under the age of 50, have used wealth in this province to support things like stars, and I can't even, anyway, it'll be a surprise. We'll hear what he has to say. And then in October, we are having Lynn Bell, who is going to talk about her, well, apparently she's famous for knowing what's up on the Royals. So we'll make sure that, is that right, Will? She's a
freelance writer based in Canada who has covered more royal visits than anybody I know.
there you go. And then Cliff.
Retired teacher and Brigadier General Cliff Walker, who was one of the senior members on that pilgrimage to Normandy and Northwest Europe in June of this year.
Right. And just so you all know that the Canadian Club had a member, Randy Brooks, speak, and it revealed the whole statue to us at Canadian Club at the end of November of 2023, or 2024. No, we are in 2024, 2023, whatever. Anyway, he, and we did donate some money from the Canadian Club to that statue. It was quite...
One little footnote to the story. The Royal Regina Rifles presented a maquette, the model. The model of the statue itself is 8 feet tall. The maquette is about 15 inches tall. But the Royal Regina Rifles presented the maquette to Princess Anne as a thank you for her unveiling. And she turned to me and said, "High Commissioner, keep this for me at Canada House."
Oh, what a beautiful gift.
So the maquette of the Royal Regina Rifles is now in the Saskatchewan suite at the Canadian High Commission in London.
Lovely. Another reason to just take a little trip across the pond, as they say, and visit Pamela and yourself. So that wraps up our evening, or our afternoon, but I do know that there is a Saskatchewan Rough Rider game.
We're going on in 5 more minutes.
Well, too bad. We'll get there. We'll all get there, and we'll let you go. And once again, thank you, High Commissioner Goodale and Mrs. Pamela Goodale. Until next year, there's lots going on in the world, right? Lots going on in the world.
Let's hope it's a better world.
It's a better world. So I'm going to have Robin Swales come up, and Carol's already at the piano. Our official Canadian Club of Regina pianists, Carol Draper and Robin Swales, to lead us in God Save the King.
Yes, don't worry. I have it. God save our gracious King, long live our noble King. God save the King. Send him victorious, happy